Yo, before we even get started on this video, I just want to say hit like, hit subscribe. This is a brand new channel of mine. My name is Uncommon NASA. I'm going to be talking about a wide variety of things. This is my channel to just talk. And right now we're going to get into this new video. Again, thank you for all the love on the Pitchfork video that I did a couple weeks ago. Peace, y'all. If you're not a fan of Clipse and you're catching this video, there's still a lot here for you. Talking about this album is going to help me talk about some things overall about music, about production, about promotion, about approach, about techniques that are heard on this album that if I made those points otherwise without relating to this, it might be harder to get across because it'd be more dealing with abstract. So like just being able to talk and be positive about something that I know a lot of other people connect with too is so rare in my life that I'm excited to do this. This is the 5 reasons why Let God Sort 'Em Out is a great album. And again, this is going to allow me to get into some other things. So even if you hate this album, which you shouldn't, it's not just about this album, so let's get into it. Okay, so this is in no particular order. It's just 5 things to really like about this album, and really 5 things that make this album special and great. So the first thing I'm gonna start with is the track order. I can't even stress to you how important track order and sequencing is to me. So when I see it's important to another group of artists as much as it was on this album, I get really excited. And what's even more interesting about the sequencing of this record is that I guess it's a little bit controversial. I guess there's a lot of discussion, like should they have started with Birds Don't Sing? And I'm holding the record, that's why I'm looking down a bit at the track order here. But this album is a dark album, it's a mature album, and it's different than their previous albums for those reasons. You know, it's made by people that are 48 and 52 years old. It's an album that's made by adults for adults, even though there's still aspects of their younger selves in this record. I think starting with such a heavy song as Birds Don't Sing that has to do with the death of their parents, it sets the tone of like, this album is going to be different, it's going to be more mature, it's going to be darker. And had that song not started it, I don't think that, you know, songs like Chains and Whips or All Things Considered, I just don't think that the other songs would have been contextualized so seriously if the album didn't start the way that it did. Sometimes, even if a song is unrelated to a song that you're hearing later in the sequence of an album, that song has already done its job. It's almost like a baseball lineup. You know, you've got a certain hitter to lead off, and that hitter is gonna set the tone for the way the rest of that lineup is approached by the opposing pitcher. You know, you've heard the singles by now, if you're paying attention, right? When you hear the beginning of this record, you've already heard Ace Trumpets and you've already heard So Be It. So you're expecting a certain thing, and then you get something that elevates what you expected. And that really helps this album, and it sets the tone. And like the colors of the record, you know, the Cause did with the purples and the blacks and some of the pinkish and violet tones, like this is, you know, it just puts you in a certain headspace to take this record in a way that would have been different had it just been, you know, a picture of the guys on the cover and had it started with Mike Tyson blow to the face. Like it would have been, you know, yeah, and like in a different album, in a different context, you could have started with that song to really get it amped up to start a record, but that's not what they were trying to do. So I think that really helps it a lot. And I just think that that's something to take home, you know, if you're making music, is like, how do you set the tone for the record? It's just something you have to really think about and consider. And the last thing I'll say about the track order and the sequencing, this album, it still would have been good if it was 18 tracks, because I'm sure they had 5 other tracks that would have been dope. But then how many times am I going to go back and listen to an 18-track album? How many times can I let myself buy into 18 individual concepts in one sitting? Even if the album's only 40 minutes long, it's irrelevant. Time doesn't matter. It's the amount of different concepts I have to engage. It had the perfect amount of concepts that I could get into and then go back and re-listen. The next thing I'll get into in terms of replay ability is the production. It is satisfying to hear this record. Just full stop right there. Like, it's a satisfying listen. That gets into mixing, it gets into mastering, gets into the more technical stuff. Also gets into the production, obviously. But it's the approach, right? I think when you're producing hip hop, you need drums. I hate to say that, like, it seems like a laughably basic thing to say, that, like, of course you need drums. There are exceptions to every rule. There are exceptions to that rule. When Rock Marciano, when Ka came out and started to do more drumless production, I think some of the point was missed on what those guys were doing, because while those productions did not have programmed drums per se, they A, were not always drumless, and B, were almost never percussionless. And so understanding that percussion includes bass, percussion includes drums, it also includes literal percussion instruments. You know, if you listen to something that has a bass line and a cowbell, it has percussion, it has a pace, it has a rhythm, you can rhyme on that, you can do flow patterns on that, you can nod heads with that. I think a lot of production today, this is mainstream, underground, wherever you want to find it, some of it is overly drumless. If you don't have any, to me, if you don't have any North Star-like percussive sound, your MC is just out there spitting and just, there's nothing keeping pace, right? So, like, you can be an offbeat, off-kilter rapper. I hate those terms. This is a stupid way to describe how somebody raps. But if you are one of those sorts of MCs, you will go off only to come back, right? So, like, you use the 3 and the 4 in order to get back right on that 1 and 2, right? It's just like a bass player. It's just like a jazz player. It's like anything. Yeah, you use some of the 4/4 to, in this case, to go off, but use that 1 to get back on. Or if you want to get really fancy, you can use the 3 or whatever measure that you want to get back on. When you don't have percussive elements to your production, it makes it impossible for a vocalist to do that. And while some people like stuff that's complete scattershot like that, more power to them, everything is subjective. I like to hear a full drum programmed track at this point in my life. And this record, in a contemporary space where not a lot of people are doing that, even in the mainstream, even some of the people that have cameos on here are not exactly doing that all the time. They did it. You know, Pharrell made a hip hop record. You know, this is a record made by somebody that grew up listening to Raising Hell. You know, like that's, you hear it. You know, this is a record produced by somebody that grew up listening to Criminal Minded. You know, those influences are there. And in how this is formatted and how it's produced. And I just think these days to be able to do that, to deliver something that sounds crisp, that sounds professional, that sounds, things are panned, things are full when you listen to headphones, or if you listen to speakers, there's no wincing, there's no like, what did he really say? Or there's no, it's completely on point production wise. Now, it's totally acceptable for somebody to hear this record and say, you know what, like, I'm just not into those beats. That's more of subjectivity, right? Like, where maybe you're not a fan of Pharrell, like, that's okay. You don't have to like everything just because I'm telling you this is a good record. But what you do have to do is you have to understand that this is produced correctly, right? Like, there is being right and there's being correct, right? Like, this is correct. It might not be right for you, but this is produced correctly. There is no doubt, like, that this was produced correctly in terms of how it was mixed, how it was put together, how it was pressed on vinyl, how it was laid out, how it was concepted, production concepted, that is, and how the beats were produced. You know, this record to me, production wise and approach wise, is a hot take. This record to me is what Stankonia almost was, right? So like, Outkast had a different history than Clipse did coming into these records, but Outkast coming into Stankonia, I think, made a lot of really great music that was experimental. I think Stankonia tried to sort of be creative, but also be crisp and studio conscious, and and you heard that with like Miss Jackson and a lot of the other songs on that record. Point is, this record, like, it delivers on what I wanted from Stankonia and what I got from Stankonia, with a different duo, different production team, different like style of approach, different time in the lives of the artists. Whether you like Stankonia or not, whether it's your favorite Outkast record or not, that's a great example of like, that is a record that is produced correctly, up until including the recording and the mixing and the mastering of that record. Perfect. If you just went from production, mixing, and mastering, Stankonia is a perfect album. And this is a perfect album with those pieces. We're talking about the technical expertise and the way that a hip-hop record should be made. That's what this does. Point number 3 is their vocal approach, right? Again, we are going to get into the lyrics themselves in another point, right? And that's where subjectivity plays into account, and we'll talk about that. Detach yourself from what they're saying for a moment if you listen to this record, and just listen to how crisply the lyrics come out, the words come out, I should say. Like how perfectly written to the beat, to the rhythm, to the measures, everything is. How there's almost no extra syllables that are not intentional. Everything is ironed out perfectly. There's no verses on here that anyone could question in terms of a technical delivery, right? Mic approach, breath control, everything is exactly on. The poise of the delivery of these verses is probably as good. I mean, you think about like Nas on Illmatic or something like that, or you can go back to Supreme, with Ghost. Just in terms of like poise, in just no doubt about what's being delivered and said, because of the amount of work that must have gone into trimming and grooming and retaking these verses. I'm sure there are some one-take Jake moments on this record, don't get me wrong. These guys are extremely talented. None of that matters. You're making a record to be replayed millions of times. It doesn't matter if these guys took 50 days to do one of these verses, and more power to them. If they took 50 minutes, then more power to them. It doesn't matter. When the food was done, it came out. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was cooked perfectly, because there's no moments of force on this record. I listen to this record, and as I start to record some new music, it is daunting. This is one of those records where I listen to it a ton, and like, you get your influence from it, you get your challenge from it, and then you as a fellow artist, you have to move on, because if you keep listening to this, you're gonna start chasing unattainable things, or you're gonna start imitating in a way that isn't natural. It is really hard to come away from listening to the breath control and the just perfect layering of the flow patterns into these beats, and then step into a mic booth and not want to do that. Even if it's in your own way that's totally different than what Clipse does. Like, that's the kind of thing that I get from an album like this, and you really can't. How do you not have that kind of takeaway? If you aren't challenged by the way these guys laid down these verses, wrote from the writing phase to the editing phase to the delivery phase, if that doesn't impress you, then I guess we're about different things. We're gonna get into the lyrics. and the approach to how this is written. I have not listened to a full Clipse album front to back since Lord Willin'. Obviously, Grindin' was an anthem in New York as much as anywhere else in the country. I was really into all of Lord Willin'. I think Clipse's music was interesting from an ethical point of view. A lot of people talk about this with Clipse, that it's just too much drug rap, it's too much coke rap. Even if they respect it and love the music, it's just, I've heard this directly from people, it's just not the vibe that they want to get into on a given day, maybe once in a while, but not all the time, because it just puts them in a negative space or brings up bad memories or just whatever it might be. I know people like that with Clipse. I think this record showed maturity and in a way that Clipse had not shown in the past, right? And I think maybe that was a big part of why No Malice was able to come back and do this, because the context was changed, right? This record feels a little less like a guilty pleasure and more like an actual pleasure to hear and get behind. Not everyone's going to come away from it that way, but I would say that is a fourth reason for me to really gravitate to this record, because I'm getting everything that 20-something-year-old No Malice and Pusha T were doing skill-wise and metaphor-wise and rhyme scheme-wise. But there's a little more of a past tense to it and a little less of an encouragement. I think some of their earlier work, I don't know, maybe a lot of people got in the game hearing that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think, like, it was almost like a drive, to I hate to use this term, but like it almost glorified a lot of what they were talking about. I don't think there's a glorification in here, but at the same time, it's also not preachy, and like it's not still them. And that's a really hard balance, and I would imagine a lot of time was taken to strike the right tone. It's very purposeful. I think that's the right word for it. Like it is painstakingly purposeful in what they're trying to get across here. This is the record that they should be making, right? Like it's not shying away from anything. It's not changing up their shit completely from what they've already established themselves as and for. It's just obvious that people that are 48 and 52 made this record. So you got this perfect combination of two guys that know each other really well. Obviously they're brothers, right? That was what was so drawing about their original work. But now you've got one of them that has become one of the best MCs working today, stayed in the music business, Pusha T. And you've got another one, No Malice, with a very similar skill set, right? Similar voice, delivery, upbringing. But he's been able to go and develop outside of the music business and bring some real world life experience, context, headiness, maturity into his lyrics. And I never noticed until this album, and I don't know if this is true of every single Clipse song, but every song on here that I can recall, Pusha T goes first, No Malice goes second. And it's really interesting, since No Malice is the older brother, that they always do that. Even if you go back to Grindin', Pusha T goes first, No Malice goes second. And that is so consistent throughout this album, even with cameos, that, again, purposeful as fuck. I'll say it again, like, if you're just like not in the headspace to listen to even coke rap adjacent music, which I would say this is, I hear you. It's fine. There's a lot of like crime shows I do not watch on TV because I don't need all that real life on me. Like, I want to watch stuff that's a little more out there. It's not to say anybody's soft, just maybe this is too real and it's just too close to the vest or whatever, or, it's totally fine. If you don't like it because you hear it the same way you heard Clipse from 20 years ago, I don't know. I would listen to it again, because I think there's a lot more going on lyrically and maturity-wise than those records. So, 5th of 5 points. I'll pick it up again to do this so I can go through it correctly. But I'll say this, and I'm not trying to knock anybody at all, but outside of Nas, there really aren't any vocal cameos on here of artists that I listen to on a regular basis. All artists that I respect, all artists that I've listened to certain songs, certain cameos, whatever one-offs here, but not artists that I've bought albums or could recite their catalogs of. We'll start with the non-rap ones like John Legend, The Dream, who I'm not super familiar with, and Pharrell himself on the mic. Like he sang and rapped briefly on here in the right places at the right time, saying and doing the right things. You know, as the producer, the guy behind the helm, making the beats, doing the mixing, doing the engineering work, doing the recordings, he had a good pulse on like where to get in and where to fit in. He didn't force himself on anything on here. That's perfect. I'm listening to John Legend. I've never listened to a John Legend song. I couldn't name you one John Legend song. And I saw them perform recently on a YouTube clip. They were performing at the Vatican. I don't really know the exact show it was on or why they were there, but John Legend was with them. And he sang this song, and so instead of watching a John Legend performance of some song I've never heard before, he was performing a song that I've heard a million, 100 times, because I've listened to this album so much. And I realized that, like, seeing him live, it appeared to me that what I thought were, like, layered harmonies was just the depth of his voice. And I never, I would have never had the opportunity to know that about a pop figure like John Legend had I not interacted with him on a record like this. And I was kind of floored, like, watching him perform live and realizing that, like, he sings, you almost hear like different harmonies from one vocal take of his. It's really trippy. I can't think of another singer like that. Just having an album introduce you to artists that you're not familiar with, or, well, that you are familiar with, but that you've just never found the right thing to connect with them. I'll say, like, Kendrick Lamar, like, I get it. Like, he's the guy. He's the guy of this whole era, and he's going to go down in history, but not someone that I listen to a lot. It's just the way it is. Like, I respect the talent, obviously, and his influence, but, until I heard this verse, which I think might be, like, the best verse I heard all year long on Chains and Whips, I kind of didn't get it. And it kind of makes me wish that he did more like this currently, like where he's just ripping. But I get why, like that's not what a mainstream fan base always wants to hear, unfortunately. That's a whole nother conversation. Also, why this record is so relevant is because you've got guys just spitting over good production and connecting with a fan base in hip-hop that has kind of lost the ear for that sort of like just talk to them kind of rhymes. And Kendrick does that here, and just an amazing verse. Just lyrics, flow-wise, he's just up and down. Again, great example of like using the measures to speed up and slow down, but hitting that one and having percussion to hook to. Like, that beat doesn't have a strong snare. That's the whole gimmick of that beat. But it's got that bass line, and it's got the kicks, and it's got that guitar solo that you can vamp off of, and that's fucking production. Do I wish that Nas was on the same beat, whatever beat it would have been, as Clipse, or that was a little more worked in to the fabric of the song that he was on? Yes. In fact, that's probably the only thing that I would critique on the whole album. I actually love the beat changes in general throughout this record, but I wish there was a little more interplay, and cohesiveness between Pusha, No Malice, and Nas on the song itself. It felt a little bit like Nas just rapped on a Pharrell beat and they kind of tacked it on the end of something. I'm waiting to hear it and not feel that way. Another thing I'll point out about this record is the homage for hip-hop culture. When you hear like So Be It, and you hear like those Nori rhyme patterns that call back to like Nori's work with Pharrell. When you hear like that EBI TDA beat, eventually it clicked. I was like, yo, this would be a dope beat for Camp Lo. And when I started to kind of like contextualize it as that kind of song, it clicked for me. And I think that, was it Inglourious Basterds in particular, I mean, if that's not a RZA sounding beat from RZA's prime period, I mean, what is, you know? And I don't think that those things were like unintentional. You know, it was a salute. You know, it was like these guys have been away as a group for so long. There's nothing wrong with like showing your influences. And I could feel the hip hop, you know, like as simple as that sounds, like you could feel hip hop on this record being present. It wasn't trying to be beyond hip hop. It wasn't trying to be an alternative to hip hop. It was trying to be a hip hop record in 2025. And I'm very grateful that a record like this was able to be made without it being ignored or shunned or cast as old school just because it had drums and it had, you know, lyrics that you could clearly understand. It had, you know, collaborations that made sense, that, you know, it wasn't shunned for not having like you know, like auto tune on it or something that you know, people generally do on successful hip hop records. Listening to this record, I felt like this gave me an opportunity to kind of talk about certain things in production in general, mic approach in general, that I wouldn't be able to talk about without a key cornerstone record like this that most people watching this have heard or can go hear, and then go back and kind of, you know, talk back and forth with me and have that conversation. So, you know, speaking of which, if you agree or not with the quality of this record or of anything that I said about production, track ordering, mic approach, writing, you know, what hit you about this record? Disagree, agree, leave it in the comments. We'll talk through a few things. You know, if there's a lot, you know, I'll do a quick follow-up video even. But I'm just happy that this record came out. It made me feel good about hip hop again. It's been a long time that I heard something that in hip hop that every time I put it on, I feel good about it. You know, there's a lot of records that are heavy that I really want to hear when I'm on that grime. And then there's other times where I'll put that on, I'll be like, this is just not helping my mood today. This record is a good balance of like, it's authentic, it's real, but somehow it's always a good time. And I think hip hop has really lost that ability to balance reality, street, authenticity, emotional top topics, and still having a good time while you listen to it. It doesn't mean it has to be a party all the time. It just means it has to be audibly satisfying. And I think that the way that this was produced really delivers on that.